team working on it because it was a very important service journalism piece.
It was so amazing. Yeah, so Gabriel later would show you some of his work through a presentation and live demo. We would have a session for question and answer. Of course, you could have your question in the Q&A box right there. You could do it in Bahasa Indonesia. You could send your question in English. If you do in Bahasa, I would translate it later for Gabriel to answer. And for Indonesian speaker, untuk teman-teman yang ingin mendengarkan webinarnya dengan bahasa Indonesia, di sebelah kanan bawah ada box kecil yang tulisannya interpretation. Klik that one dan pilih bahasa Indonesia. You will hear our colleague, Stephanie, doing the interpretation for you. Okay, so let's start the fun. Gabriel, if you could share your screen and do the presentation.
Yes.
It's all yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everyone who's here. I'm gonna drag this window down and bring this other one up. So it might be a little strange that I'm looking at different directions sometimes, but hopefully this is all gonna work out. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great. So I'm calling these the series of works that I brought today. I'm defining them as cultural visualization. I work in this department called Digital News Design, which works on custom presentations for stories. So not necessarily strictly graphics stories. There is a graphics department who works on charts and maps and more strictly data viz stuff. And design, you see, there are some hybrid works that we do that are more related to design and some that touch on visualization as well. So a very quick overview. Let me just keep a clock around so I don't run over time. Very quick background of mine. I have a background in graphic design. I went to undergrad for graphic design. And then after graduating, I started working in print. I started working in magazines doing art direction. And it's not something that I planned as a designer. It's something that ended up happening, but it kind of shaped the way I started to see design and the way I moved my career forward too. So these are several examples of pages that I've done. It's like 15 years old now, probably. And what interested me at the time was not only this mix of different visual languages like photography, illustration, typography, color, but also the challenge of communicating something that was very specialized to a general audience. So the newsroom process, which is you get a draft, someone is reporting on something, you have to read that and understand, but keep your beginner eyes to explain that to people who are not aware of any of that. So, and during that time, that was around 2008, these other types of charts started to evolve as well that we were calling data visualization, right? That were more complex graphics. And because I had some background in coding, I started to do that thing too, but mainly for print, for PDFs, for the magazines, not doing anything interactive until then. And those works started to become more and more code-based until I left magazines completely and went to do masters in design and technology here in New York. And that's when I transitioned from a print designer to actually a digital designer, if you will. So I learned more coding languages and started to think of coding not as this particular language. You know, like a lot of people have this question about, oh, do you know Python? Do you know PHP, JavaScript, whatever? But this program allowed me to see coding more as this tool, just like design, you know, a new language that you can use as a tool for anything that you're working on. So some of these things were done entirely with code, some were done with a mix of like Adobe software, Illustrator, Photoshop, and coding. And then, yeah, today I'm at the New York Times in this department called Digital News Design. And a way to define this in a simple sentence would be, we do custom presentation for digital stories. So 99% of what you see published at the New York Times is published through a CMS, like a content management system, say something like a text editor where the reporter is writing something, the editor comes, changes the text a little bit, the photo editor pastes the image onto it, and they publish it. And as beautiful as it is, it has some restrictions in terms of what you can do with the visuals, especially. And then that's where our team comes in. So some examples of things that we do are photo essays. So heavily visual stories that need some presentation because there's a special treatment we want to do with the photos or the way the things scroll and interact. So all of these examples here. It could be that there is a different format as well. Let me see if these are clickable here. It could be that we are doing a story that it is so important that it requires a different format. So for example, this story scrolls horizontally and each essay for each of the items is behind a click here. You have to click to read it. So this wouldn't be possible through the regular CMS, right? Also, it involves a lot of art direction, like the typography that is different. You know, I think it's obvious that it doesn't look like a regular article, hopefully. Go back to this one. And a lot of these have to do with culture because I've been at the Times for about 4 years now. And for 3 years, I worked exclusively, not exclusively, but 90% of the time with the culture desk. So, and a lot of the things that we did at the culture desk involved some kind of list. For example, the 25 greatest actors, you know, so had to think of a way of using the images to show this list and came up with these treatment for how you scroll and how they show up. So one question people might be having at this point is, how is that split and how is the team? Who does what there? We are designers and coders. Some people within this axis of design and code, let's say design's here, code is here. I always get confused. But some people are closer to the design side of this axis, and some people are closer to the coding one, but we all work with both. We all are able to build our own pages and also to design it. And some people have also some journalism background. They like reporting on things, but usually our team does not do that unless people have a personal interest in it. And we also work a lot with graphics, this other department that I was talking about. So for example, this one's not linked, but I think it's worth showing. Social distancing. So this is a story that came out in April 2020. So it was very early in the pandemic, actually. We were able to do this 3D story. Graphics worked on it as well. They did the models and they reported on it, found the simulation of the particles when someone coughs and how the particles spread and how they can spread for longer than 6 feet, which was the required distance by them. So a lot of our work overlaps with graphics as well. A lot of times we do things with them. Some recent work that I've done recently too, just to expand on what are these projects that I'm talking about. This is a story about some cassette tapes that were found in a house in this beach here in New York City called Fire Island. So there is a kind of a multimedia need here. There's a sound icon here, and when you get to these moments, I don't know if the sound's going to work, so I'm not even going to try, but when you get to these moments, the sound of these tapes is going to play. So it's a way of like bringing people into like the mood of the story. So sometimes we get involved because we need to build this technology for it to happen. It could be, we also work on more newsy stories, because you have seen like photo essays and stories about songs and that kind of stuff, but also when the Taliban took over Kabul, the New York Times, the staff was there, and the people took videos and reported on their own trying to escape Kabul, and we did a story on that too. So sometimes we also work on these more newsy stories, including elections and politics in general. This is also a story sound. This could be interesting to show really quickly. Yeah, just so we get to this introduction. It is a guide on how to vote in the US 2020 elections, and it is very simple. So not everything we do is full of huge photography and illustrations, and we take into account what is the purpose of the page as well. So this had to be a very quick guide on, hey, where are you voting? Not sure how familiar the audience is with the US elections. They're confusing even for me, and I'm not American, and I'm sure they're confusing for most Americans too. That's why we did this guide. So say if I were registered to vote in New York, I would say, New York, are you registered to vote? Let's say no. Plan to vote by mail, which could happen here in 2020. And then it spits out a direct answer as a guide for you. So as you can see, I kind of made up this list of what these custom stories are, but there's not a definition anywhere. Like I made this up. This is not written anywhere officially inside the New York Times. But some of the reasons why this team might get involved into something are something as newsworthy, like the Kabul evacuation story or elections in general. There's a multimedia need. Maybe there are videos or auto-playing sound, like in the Fire Island story. Maybe there's a new format, like in the gallery one that I was scrolling through that scrolls horizontally. Or there is some interaction needed. For example, we sometimes do stories like the voting guide, right? Where we ask people something, and depending on their interaction, they're going to go to some specific page on that story. But this is very flexible too, and it's something that we analyze on a case-by-case basis. So I'm going to start to show some specific examples so you can understand who are the people working on these things and how they actually get done. This story is called The Hidden Melodies of Subways Around the World. Let me just scroll through it. It's not linked, but you can find it. And it's a story that shows what the sounds of the subway are. I don't think the song is gonna come through here. Can you guys listen to this song? No. the sound, that's all right. I think you can
You
visit
have
this.
to like reshare and then allow the sound, I think.
Yeah. Is it worth doing it? Probably not, but I can tell you what these sounds are. They do dun dun or like ding dun. They're like the bells from the doors closing, basically, and they're different depending on where you are in the world. And we built this page that visualizes the sounds and it plays the sounds as well. Um, so how this came about was this graphics editor called Denise Liu. She did it as a personal project. She found, she's also a musician. She plays piano. And she found these YouTube videos. I actually have to ask her why she started doing that at all, but she found these YouTube videos of recordings of these sounds in cities across the world. So Jakarta probably there, Delhi in India is probably there, Paris, and uh, all over the world. I don't know how many she did. And being a musician, she grouped them by musical intervals. So it is very music theory heavy, the way it is her post. She did it on Medium. So she grouped it by major third down, which is basically the dun dun. So some just do the dun dun, some do the dun 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 twice, you know. So she grouped it. Some do an arpeggio. They play several notes of a chord. Hopefully this is not getting too complicated, but some do dun dun dun, like 3 notes. And you know, she had this, she did it as a personal project and she pitched it to some desks inside the newsroom. So everything that is published by the Times goes through a desk. If you pay attention to the URL at the top, it's usually /politics / the name of the story, or /culture / name of the story. Then you can tell what desk it came from. It doesn't really matter for the reader, but internally that's the process. So she needed to find a desk to publish it, and she landed on culture. People in culture found that an interesting culture project because it talked about the songs. But then we also commissioned a report, assigned a reporter to do more investigations on why these sounds came about. So this reporter talked to the engineer responsible for the sounds in Paris and asked him why he used that sound, for example. So then people working in this project were Umi Siam, who's from Indonesia. By the way, you guys should look her up. And she's a digital news designer, working the same team as myself. So 2 designers and developers. Denise as a graphics editor, which at this point was more like advising us. Alicia DeSantis was the editor on it and a reporter. So you have at least like 5 people in this story. And we started to discuss, well, Denise did this great job of like finding the actual notes and all of that, but for a general audience, that's not readable. That's not intelligible. So that goes back to what I was talking about when I said that I really liked working in magazines because it presented this challenge of getting something that was very specialized and then translating it to the general audience. So we started to look for different representations of musical notes. I'm a huge fan of the person who did these ones. I don't think they're gonna play it now, but they're basically lines that try to mimic these intervals that you see here without the need for an actual musical score, and they follow the sounds too. Then another challenge that usually happens in these stories is how do you glue things together, right? That's the editing process. So a lot of people might think of editing as just you get a copy from the reporter and you move the words around, rewrite some of them. And that's usually the words editor work. But besides that, there's a huge editing process, which is how do you actually build a page like that? How do you put together the interview with the Paris engineer, with the sounds from different subways, and then more interviews and all of that. So one idea we had was to build these blocks where you'd have some paragraphs of the reported story, then you would transition to this dark mode where you see the lines and then you hear the sounds from different cities, and then you go back to the story. And these are some sketches from Mumi, actually. And this is a very flexible, organic process where we're all trying to improve the story. So there is no, okay, so someone goes there, write it, send it to us by email, and then we just paste it on the page. It's more like we have regular meetings about it. And Umi, for example, suggested, well, we need some additional copy on top of those cities to explain what is going on with the sounds here, you know, something that says, does the song in New York sounds like something, the song in Rio de Janeiro sounds like bossa nova, which was a great idea. And then we had to actually build these lines. It was a hugely complex project, but is it still here? Yeah. So this is how it goes. You have some part that is the reported part. Then you go into these. It explains what's going on in Montreal, Budapest. I'm gonna mute it to myself. And we linked the animation to the notes too, so people could see this as really a visualization of the thing, and not just as some illustration on top of the page. Yeah, and we need ads in between the things.
It's amazing. How long does it take to build this visualization from scratch to the animation?
Yeah, it is a good question. We don't, I think the time we have from say, oh, we have most of what we need to start until we publish is usually 3 weeks, which doesn't mean that we, like Umi and I, are working full time on it for those 3 weeks. It's usually the time it takes for the thing to get built. But there are projects that we do in a week, and there are projects that end up lasting 3 months, but not because we're actively working on it, but say there's so many moving pieces, like the Kabul one, for example. We tried to piece together that story through videos shot from the iPhone that the reporters had, and it was a hugely complex process where we have to double check with each reporter all the time, and that would take a long time. So it varies, but I would say a story like that takes about 3 to 2 weeks for building. And this is another, it's not a story, it's a series that we just published the second episode of it today, actually. So I can show you. I think the screenshots I have are all from the first one. This is a little different because it was actually pitched by us in design with some editors and coaches. So our movie critic, Manola Dargis, had this idea of doing a story about dog reaction shots in movies. She's a great person who knows everything about movies, and she came came up with this quirky, funny idea of showing different dog reaction shots and how they are used as a device for directors to show something, the tone of some dialogue, or for the character to be reflected on the dog. And it was a funny idea that immediately made us, and by us, I mean, it was me working in design, and 3 more editors from culture who were working with Manola at that point. We thought, well, that sounds great. Even Manola herself had this idea of some kind of series, because she said, well, besides dog reaction shots that are, for example, the running man, the scene of a man running, it's kind of a recurring scene, or the vertigo shot when the person is static in front of the camera, but the background moves. So she had this idea of like, oh, there are these patterns that repeat through movies. And we started to think, well, that could be applied for culture in general. That not only happens in movies. If we ask the critics here at the Times, not only the movie ones, but also the music ones and other critics, to think about examples of other forms of patterns, they would probably come up with some interesting ideas. So, and for a very long time, I had this idea of building something that looks like an Instagram search page. That's what Instagram shows when I click on search. So it's mostly guitars. That format kind of fascinates me. This grid of some static images, some moving videos, they're all short clips, and it's just a visual index. If you think about it, it's so innovative. Like, you wouldn't find this 10 years ago. No one would build a page that doesn't have anything written on the things. There's no index. This is the total opposite of a Google search page, right? Which is just the text. There's just a visual index, and somehow it is so attractive. So for a long time, I had this idea of like waiting for the opportunity to do something that looked like that. And when we came up with this idea of the series, we then made a call out for some editors inside of the Times. And we discussed what it would look like. So I drew this mock-up using Sketch, which is a design app, kind of based on that Instagram search idea. So it will be a grid of some repeating pattern. In this case, one of the critics had an idea in mind, which was the glasses that Meryl Streep uses in different movies. So we built this mock-up based on her idea. And a little like Instagram, sometimes you would get to a moment where you zoom into a specific scene, slides to another one, then moves back to the grid, and that's basically it. So let me show you. Oh, yes. You asked about the time to build the page. It's also the case that we don't, like I said, we don't work full time on the thing, to build the core device for this page. It took me maybe 2 days. Like, there was started on a Thursday, then on a Friday night, was very excited to share this with the editors, which is just a grid with one of the blocks moving and expanding. But everything that I wanted, it's basically there. This idea of, we're going to have a grid. Not all of the cells are the same size. I want something more organic so we can have more design on this. And sometimes we have bigger moments. So basically it. And then the final page ended up looking like this. It's called Meryl Streep's One Weird Trick. This writer, it's really funny with her writing. But yeah, we try to show, and I actually like calling this cultural visualization. I remember that was a term in 2013 when I was doing my master's in design and technology, where people were trying to show patterns in culture, not through charts, not reducing things to graphic elements, but actually showing the things. And this is what I'm trying to do here as well. So when you land here, you immediately know this is about Meryl Streep. And if you stop to pay attention, even if you could not read English, you would be able to understand, well, this is about the glasses. That's what's in common with all of these. So we scroll through some of the examples here. And at this point, these images are making the point that it is indeed a recurring artifact that she uses. The more recent role. Then it goes to show how glasses are this magical thing that can change the identity, right? The classic example being Superman, how he can go from being Clark Kent to Superman just by taking off the glasses. Or how, you know, this character is seen as a totally different person and takes off the glasses. He goes to other examples of characters using glasses and going back to Meryl Streep. And another one we did, the one that was published today, about water bottles in comedy. So the idea of the series is we're going to show you something that has always been there, but you've never paid attention to it. So everybody always found Meryl Streep amazing, but never paid attention to the fact that she's using the glasses to build some character. And people might like stand up, but might not have asked themselves, why is there always a water bottle there? And the thesis here is that the water bottle is the thing that is signaling to the fact that the stand-up comedian is not an actor. He's not doing a character. He's being himself or herself. So this is about real life. So as opposed to actors who have to hide and drink some water, they are the people, the real people drinking the water, and they're talking about their real experiences. But, you know, this is a short summary of the argument, how it goes, but this is the main idea. Yeah, and we have some more of these planned. I hope to publish 8 of these, but all based on this idea that it's a grid and you can identify some pattern by looking at the images and the videos there. One thing that I like to mention is that we use Google Docs to build these things, and I like to build them in a way that the editors themselves can actually do not the code, but they can build the thing. So this is a way to declare the grid. You know, people have to come in and say, this is the video, this is the size that I want for that cell on the video. And then they have to actually write the thing, thinking about this structure too, or on each of these units here is a slide in that presentation. So the editor has to come and say, well, I want Superman and these other 2 images to be big when I'm on this stage, and this is what's going to be written in there. So that way, of course, you need some tech savvy editors to understand what's going on here. But once you train them on the machine that you built, they're able to do the thing themselves, you know, and it becomes more replicable as well. Just gonna drink some water. Just a second.
Just a reminder for all of you attendees who want to ask question to Gabriel, you are more than welcome to type your question in the Q&A box. You could ask your question in English or you can do it in Bahasa Indonesia. I will translate it to you.
And well, yes, a more serious subject. This story was published close to when the US reached 500,000 deaths, COVID deaths. There has been a piece on the million deaths, unfortunately, already, which is quite different from this one. But when we started working on this one, it was made based on a call out we put out to readers. So this is an example of a totally different team structure as well. So this editor in National, which is the desk that covers everything related to the US, had this idea of asking readers to submit photos of people close to them that they lost to COVID. It could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be someone they knew that they had some relationship with. And then we would build something using that material. So this editor then got in touch with video, which is a different department, and design. So the core team on this story is an editor in National, a video editor, and myself as the design editor. I'll show you how the story goes before showing you how it was built. There's this preamble where we show some of the most compelling examples of people who lost someone to COVID. We produced those videos. And it starts with one of the cases. So for all of those, I don't remember how many submissions we got from the readers, but we chose 4 people to do additional material. These 4 people, the video team went to their houses and shot videos with them. And we also used some footage from the deceased person. So this is the daughter who died, and we interviewed her mom. Yeah, this is very hard to watch video actually, because she left a baby as well. So it's been taken care of by the grandma. So the main idea we had with the story was that we did not want to make it a data-oriented story. The number in itself was very compelling, the 500,000 deaths. And also the Times was preparing a lot of other stories that focused more on the numbers, focused on the demographics of the population that was dying, and timeline and other types of analysis. So this one would be a totally different story, focused more on the reader submissions that we got. So we started to sketch some things, thinking about, well, maybe we show one picture per person, and we have the relationship is the most important thing, but then we have some additional information about them. And these design exercises are not only about design. You know, when I'm doing a sketch like this, it's not only about, oh, which font should I pick here? Which font looks better? A lot of these things inform the tone of the story as well, because if you do something like this, which ended up not being what we did, it looks too much like a list. It looks too much like a technical information that you're putting out there without emotion, right? Even though you're highlighting mother, there are these 2 lines of a sans serif font that look too much like a neutral thing, as if you're going through a list. So these sketches evolved to some other things that use typography in a more expressive way. Because the more and more we talked with the whole team talked, we understood that the relationship was the most compelling thing about each of these people, right? It is very hard when you read something like, I lost my father, I lost my daughter. So that was basically the thing that we wanted to focus on. And then this exploded typography here, which ended up being the final thing, they have to do with that. They have to do with the fact that we want really people to read this, and they can read the name of the person and the date as a second step in the hierarchy, but we're really highlighting what these people meant to the people who are still alive. These are some sketches for desktop. Yeah, at this point, you might have noticed that, yes, we have to think about mobile and desktop, and if thinking about mobile first most of the time. And the structure of the story at that point was basically just a list. We didn't have any editing. So going back to that difference between the words editor and the editing of the whole story, we needed a way of grouping these people in some logical sense that moved the readers throughout the narrative, so they could have a narrative, so it wouldn't be just like I lost my, and no sense of progress. So it started to group them, thinking about, well, maybe we start to talk about family relationships first, then we do a break for the video, maybe then we jump into another criteria. And I didn't have those criteria in mind yet, but started to think that we should have something to group them. And also by seeing the list, I started to see, well, there's some people who lost more than one person. They could definitely go together. That's like a compelling argument for a group. And then we ended up on this. We start with different relationships. People lost a husband, boyfriend, brother-in-law. Then people who lost some relatives, family, and people who lost multiple family members. And these sections are broken by the videos, the longer narrative pieces that we have in between. And like I said, in an ideal world, and this project was pretty much an ideal scenario, these decisions are not being taken individually. It's not like the photo editor goes and picks 5 people and send them an email to us. We put them on the page, and then the reporter sends some copy in. It is pretty hard to glue things together if they're done like that. What was done instead was I would do some of these arrangements without actually picking which people we would put on the page, and then we would have a meeting online because we were all working at home at this point. But if we were in the office, I would have just like printed everything and put on the ground. And we would go through the photos because the photo editor might have an idea about which photo is good to use in terms of visuals. But the editor in National, who knew better about the reader submissions, might know better which stories are more compelling. But then I'm also there to argue in favor of the whole flow of the thing and the whole sequence. So all of those decisions have to happen together, and we have to analyze all of that together to actually go and say, okay, these red ones, I would like drag these rectangles around and be, okay, so this red one is one that we're using, and then this one, and then this one. Do we have enough representation here in terms of demographics and ages and the story we're trying to tell? Okay, yeah, so let's move forward, and this is going to be it. Yeah, this is a zoom into that page. and I can show you a little bit more about the final thing. So there's also these moments. I like to talk about them too, because say at this point you understood the one photo per scroll device that is going on, but that can become a little boring after you scroll through it. So you always, in every story you do, you come up with some rules and then some way of breaking the rules so that you add some surprise and some rhythm to it. So in this case, the thing breaks out of that one slide per scroll thing, and it breaks out of the grid as well. And you have this overlap of photos showing the diversity of relationships that we had in the reader submissions there. Breaks to another video. That's a long one, so I'm gonna scroll through. This is the family section. Yeah, it was a tough story to work on, but we were glad to do it as a service to these people. So again, a part of the page that breaks out of that structure there. Instead of showing just one person, you have groups, grandmothers and grandfathers, mothers. We had lots and lots of submissions, fathers. And also, of course, there was a reporter writing this copy that kind of weaves everything together. We go until 10:55, which is actually 9:55 for you. Is that right? We have about 7 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you mind answering some question, I have people from the audience asking. One of them asked, where do you find your idea and how was the discussion process within the newsroom? You touched on that a bit, like people, some going to you with their idea or you pitch to the newsroom, but is there like a pitch form or something in the newsroom, or how do you think when people here they want to pitch this kind of visual story to their editors, how
Yeah.
do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually our team does not pitch a story. Some people in our team do that, but usually editors in the desks might have a sense of one story that is coming that might need the involvement of design for some reason, and then they kind of pitch their story to us. They kind of ask us to go to a meeting and hear about their story and try to see if there is need for design to be involved. Then this is like we're courting each other there. And then if, say, National came to us, for example, this one, National came to us and said, yes, we have this reader submission. We want to do something visual with it. Then some of those criteria that I outlined before, like, is it newsworthy, multimedia, what is it? Some of those things are things that we have in mind when deciding whether we would be involved in that project or not. So in this case, it is newsworthy. We knew that the newsroom in general, the masthead, was expecting a big piece on this. So we knew we needed to be involved. Second, we knew there was interesting material from the reader submissions, and there would be even more interesting material from the video team, which does amazing things. So that's how we decided, yes, we're gonna work on this. And then I don't know if the question also has to do with that, but how then do us in design present that ideas to the editors, and how it actually becomes this thing? I usually do these static mockups, um, like these, and these are actually pretty similar, but I try to make at least two things that look completely different from each other. And then it's less of a, it's not like a design studio or advertisement agency presentation. It's more about sharing your thoughts with the editor and the rest of the team, and say, hey, these are things that I'm thinking about that could work for the story. What do you think? And usually it's not going to be neither of those ideas. It's going to be something that it's transformed from them, into something else. Yeah, it might sound like overly optimistic on my side, but I like to think that we're working with these people, we're working with the journalists, and not like presenting and working for them, which would be the case in say an agency or studio.
Mhm. But how do you find an inspiration for the design? You mentioned that, you look at through Instagram, but is there any like platforms or place that you go to find like the latest design? What kind of inspire you to do your next project?
Yeah. I do love magazines still, and worked in magazines for a long time, and I like to consume print, uh, which is, it's not a very good habit, because there are very print-based ideas that do not translate to this. But I also take a look at inspiration websites like Webby Awards or something like that, and it's not, and I'm constantly looking at them. I think it's better to be constantly consuming inspiration as opposed to, oh, I have this project, let me look into some inspiration. Because if you do that, then the proximity to the thing that you're looking at is too close. And as opposed to, if you're just like looking at stuff all the time, then you're that's like ingrained in your brain, and it's going to translate to the next thing that you do. But all of the rest too ends up influencing these. Like I said, the Instagram search, like I don't consume Instagram stories that much, but I do love the language, like how any regular person can use and edit their own stories. Like they can put a video, and then next is a photo, and text over, and emoji, and like how people are building these things. So, and sometimes these visuals, like the idea of like overlapping the photo with the video, these things are just borrowed from all of that. Like I've probably seen people doing that on social media. Like sometimes people, even on Instagram, people would find interesting ways of, instead of posting a square photo, post something with white space and it's offset from the page, and it looks more interesting somehow. And I look at that and think, well, that's interesting. Like maybe you shouldn't always do a photo like that way. Maybe it's interesting to offset it when there is a reason. So these ideas like keep living in my brain until they find a reason to go out, which is, it's something that I would like to highlight as well. For example, like the Instagram search thing, like I was saying, like I wanted to do that page, but for a long time I was waiting for a reason, right? I cannot go and get the 500,000 depths story and be like, guys, this is it. I'm gonna do this Instagram page, you know. I need to find something that fits that idea, because this is very important for sure.
Yeah. So this person also asked, I mean, you have a background in programming, like you know how to code, but in this case, if there's a beginner designer and they want to learn about the basic design in kind of like a WordPress or some other program language to start, how do you feel about, you know, there's a lot of software out there, tools that help people who don't have coding background to create not something like this, obviously very advanced, but something that, you know, they could work with, they could practice with. What is your you know, what can you tell them about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's fascinating how the tools evolved today. Like going back to Instagram stories, you know, it is so intuitive and it's more complicated. It does more amazing things than Photoshop could do when I started using Photoshop almost 20 years ago. And anyone can do that. So I think there's that. There's like people are already growing up in this digital first world where they can use these tools. And I believe that in some years, people won't need code at all to do this. I think that the tools are going to evolve. So I feel like I'm the person typesetting, you know, the equivalent of the person typesetting things in lead type like 30 years ago, and doing a page in lead, or say the people who had to cut the sheets of vinyl to do page layouts, you know. That's me today, like having to do code to do these things. But you guys tomorrow uh are gonna be like I was when I started in magazines, which there was already in design, Adobe software, you know, and I didn't have to know anything about like cutting stuff to do an actual page. There was a software. So I think in the future that's gonna happen. But meanwhile, I think the basic thing would be to, yes, produce whatever you want to produce in whatever tools you can find, but thinking about it professionally, knowing at least HTML and CSS are the basics. Like I said in the beginning, some people in our team are more on the design side of things. They are great art directors. They don't have a ton of coding experience, but they are great at CSS. They can, and CSS defines the layout of things. It doesn't define like the interactivity and that kind of stuff, but still you can do a lot with just CSS. So, and it is not hard to learn. There are thousands of courses online for free.
Is there any specific like, because in Indonesia, definitely going to be useful to know, because people are using their mobile phone to read news. Like I think more than 90% people are using mobile phone to read their news. And then there's this very bad internet connection. And when you want to build something like this, you need those too. So how do you incorporate this like design wise, but still could be accessible and useful for people who would access them?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think we take that in consideration, especially when doing service. So for example, going back to, there's a lot of things on the screen. But when we did the voting guide, that was our main concern, was to build a page that was really fast, that it didn't have images to load, and it's actually loading very slow here. It's funny, but there's nothing on this page. It doesn't have images, it doesn't have illustration. You know, we didn't add any visual flourishes, and even in terms of code, it is very simple and straightforward. I'm embarrassing myself with this page that doesn't load now as I'm talking about page load. But anyway, but yeah, that is definitely a concern when we do things that are more service oriented. Another example would be the COVID tracker, right, which you mentioned in the beginning. And by COVID tracker, I mean this set of pages. Funny how my internet now doesn't like me. But by COVID tracker, I mean this set of pages that you all might have seen at this point. We have like a page for the US, a page for Brazil, Italy. Indonesia is not there. I think it's only 9 countries. But we also have pages for each state. So it's a very service-oriented thing. And we constantly refactor the code of that page so that it loads very fast. Like it's not sending any data that is not used. It doesn't have images. All of the things that we need to render the maps are only the things that we send there and all of them. For some other stories, there's less of that preoccupation because this is an entertainment piece that even though it should work very well on the phone, we are assuming that you're reading this in a context where maybe you're at home with good Wi-Fi or something like that, you know. So it depends on the story too.
Right.
But it does have to work everywhere. We
Do you
try
have
to
like,
do it.
do you also have like, oh, it has to be lower than something kilobyte to load for the image, for example? Is there any restriction like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have a specific criteria like that, but we do our best to minimize the page load. So for example, we publish each of these images and videos in 4 or 5 different sizes. And when the page load, we identify which size they need to be rendered, and we only load that one size. You know, and even for this page, when say the Superman clip, when it goes from this to this size, then we load the bigger one. You know, there's a lot of small things or lazy loading things on say only when you get to them and you scroll. Yeah, we're constantly tweaking these things to make the page more performant. But there's not a number. There's not a number.
Good. We have another question asking, how long did it take for you to do your typography research? Have you, by any means, send the samples to audience and ask for their feedback? I guess the feedback is from the newsroom or people involved in the project, right? Or have you ever trial, a project to a real audience and ask for feedback?
Yeah, that is not that usual in newsrooms because of deadlines, if you ask me. There is, for example, a travel series that we are redesigning right now, where the desk commissioned an agency to do some user research, and based on those insights, we're doing some things about the series. But for specific stories, no. What happens is the things we publish end up informing the next things, right? So for example, this is not the first time that Culture does a series during the summer. That was the series called Why I Love, published in 2018. And then back then, all of the 5 episodes of the series were published at once. And then with audience metrics, they found out that the stories ended up cannibalizing themselves. You know, the people interested in those stories were kind of the same, but they wouldn't read all of the five that were published at the same time. So they would pick just one or two, and then the stories all died at the same time. And that was kind of a learning for us, because then because of that audience inside, we decided, well, let's publish one every 2 weeks or some frequency like that, so that there is a time for this audience to reach a peak, then slowly go down, and then we publish another one. So there's that kind of thing where what we publish informs what we do next.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm aware of the time. Aware of the time in the US also. It must be pretty late right now. Some of the question that you ask here, actually, Gabriel has already answered. One person asking about suggestion about coding or programming for emerging journalists and where to start. They also ask, how do you start all of this? And Gabriel has been very open about his background, and this webinar is also recorded. I'm sure. I think you need to later ask the organizer if they share the recorded session, but it was very inspiring. I think we only have a little more time with Gabriel. So is there anything that you could give? I think a lot of our audience are very new journalists. They're emerging journalists. Some are still at the college, I guess, learning about journalism. So is there any things that you could share with them, how this piece of visual journalism would be, one of the most important thing in journalism?
Yeah, it will definitely be. It already is, I think. So right now, well, let me step back. When I was working in magazines around 2010, we would do things for print, and then someone from the website would get the text, download the images or whatever from a folder, and then publish it to the web. And there wasn't that much effort put into that. I left magazines and journalism for some time, and when I came back almost 10 years later, the whole thing had completely flipped. And at the New York Times, we actually put more effort into doing the digital version of these stories. And then someone sometimes would do an adaptation of it for print. And we're still in this hybrid world where we're doing both things, but more and more, I am sure, our efforts, not only our efforts as the New York Times, but our efforts as journalists will be on doing digital things. And even if, like, I have a design background, some of you might have a journalism background, is that our team is very hybrid. We don't ask about college degrees when we are hiring. We don't say, did you come from design? Did you come from journalism? What we're looking for is people with some strong visual skills and some journalistic sense, what we call editorial skills. So people who either have experience in newsrooms, like myself, like I had experience in newsrooms before, or people who have a journalism background. But then, even if you who are listening to this in Indonesia don't think about going straight into design and like being a designer in newsroom, a lot of the best people I worked with on these stories are journalists who have a really strong visual sense of things. Uh, why is that important? When I'm discussing ideas with them, I would sometimes present static mock-ups and say, well, we're thinking about this is going to scroll and it's going to work this way. There's a lot of like abstraction you have to do, and the person on the other side needs to have some vocabulary too, and like knows about these stories, knows about these formats to understand what is possible and what I'm talking about when I'm presenting something. And also to suggest things, to understand when it makes sense to use a story that scrolls horizontally or it scrolls this way, slide. What's the difference between something that is a slide-based presentation versus something that is a written through piece with some photos? All of those things are going to be part of the vocabulary, the regular vocabulary of journalism. Not in the future, they already are, I think. And it is important to have this visual notion, I think, even if you don't think of yourselves as designers.
Thank you. Very, very great insight from you, Gabriel. So I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for you guys who joined our webinar from the start. And for those of you who are late, make sure that you know where the recorded session was published, because it is very, very interesting, and Gabriel is amazing. So thank you guys for joining us. See you at the next session. This conference is over today, but you still have a lot of great sessions. So stay tuned. Bye-bye, Gabriel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gabriel. Bye.